The Pentagon deemed Colonel Victoria Vex Caldwell too old for frontline operations at 48, but they never expected her to single-handedly neutralize an elite enemy squad using nothing but decades of experience and the very age they used against her. The morning briefing was scheduled for 0500 hours at Fort Reynolds, but Colonel Victoria Caldwell had been awake since 0300, meticulously reviewing mission parameters in the dim light of her quarters. 26 years of military service had conditioned her body to function on minimal sleep, a skill the younger officers often marveled at when they weren't busy dismissing her as past her prime. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. At 48, Vex, as she'd been known since her early days in Special Forces, stood ramrod. Straight, her salt and pepper hair cropped in a regulation cut that did nothing to soften her weathered features. Years of deployments across 3 continents had etched fine lines around her eyes, each one representing lessons learned and lives saved. The irony wasn't lost on her that those same lines now served as evidence for why she should be kept from the field. The Special Operations Tactical Response Unit hummed with its usual pre-mission energy weapons being checked, communications equipment tested, intel reports exchanged in hurried whispers. As Victoria entered the command center, the buzz of conversation dimmed momentarily before resuming at a slightly lower volume. She caught the sidelong glances, the subtle shift in body language as younger officers straightened their postures in her presence, gesture of respect tinged with something else. Pity, perhaps, or worse, dismissal. Colonel Caldwell, Captain. James Harrison nodded as she approached the main tactical display. At 32, Harrison represented the new generation of special operators. Technically proficient, physically impressive, and woefully inexperienced in Victoria's estimation. Didn't expect to see you this morning. Thought you'd be handling the training rotation back at HQ. The implied question hung in the air. Why are you here instead of where you belong? Victoria ignored it, focusing instead on the holographic terrain. Map displaying their target, a suspected terrorist compound in the mountains of northern Syria. Wanted to review the operational parameters before you deploy, she replied, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded the respect of generals. The eastern approach looks problematic. Satellite imagery shows increased activity in those ridge positions compared to our last surveillance pass. Harrison exchanged a glance with Lieutenant Commander Diaz, his second in command. With all due respect, Colonel, we've accounted for the ridge positions. The team will approach from the south, using the riverbed as cover. The riverbed that's currently experiencing seasonal flooding due to early snowmelt in the higher elevations, Victoria pointed out, enlarging a section of the map with a gesture. Unless your team has developed amphibious capabilities overnight, you'll be wading through chest-high water in full gear. A tense silence followed. Victoria could practically hear the unspoken thoughts. She's micromanaging. She doesn't trust us. She can't let go of the reins. We'll adjust the route, Harrison finally conceded, though his tone suggested he was merely humoring her. Anything else, Colonel? Victoria spent the next 15 minutes outlining potential complications with the mission parameters intel. Gaps, weather concerns, extraction challenges, each point met with increasingly transparent impatience from Harrison and his team. By the time she finished, the atmosphere in the command center had shifted from professional deference to barely concealed annoyance. Major General Lawrence Phillips arrived as the briefing concluded, his imposing figure drawing immediate attention. At 56, Phillips was one of the few officers who outranked Victoria, both in hierarchy and age, a fact he rarely let her forget. Colonel Caldwell, he acknowledged with a curt nod. I wasn't aware you were part of this operational briefing. Just offering some perspective, sir, Victoria replied evenly. Perspective is valuable, Phillips said, his tone suggesting otherwise. But let's make sure we're not confusing perspective with ... interference. Captain, Harrison has operational command of this mission. Understood, sir. Phillips turned to address the assembled team, effectively dismissing her from the conversation. This operation requires speed, agility, and adaptability qualities essential to our new tactical doctrine. The target compound houses individuals responsible for the embassy attack last month. We need this to be clean, quick, and decisive. Victoria listened as Phillips outlined mission parameters she had helped develop years ago, now repackaged as innovative strategic thinking. The irony might have been amusing if it weren't so frustrating. As the briefing concluded and team members dispersed to final preparations, Phillips gestured for her to remain behind. Victoria, he began once they were alone, dropping the formality. Of rank, they had known each other for 20 years, had once been equals on the fast track to senior command. Now Phillips spoke to her with the careful tone of a doctor delivering unwelcome news. We need to discuss your role here. My role is clear, sir. Strategic oversight and operational consultation. Your experience is invaluable, Phillips continued as if she hadn't spoken. But there's growing concern about your involvement in field operations planning. Some feel you're having trouble transitioning to a purely advisory capacity. Victoria felt her jaw tighten. Some? The Joint Chiefs are reorganizing Special Operations Command structure. They're looking for leadership that reflects the future of warfare, not its past. The implication hung in the air between them. You are the past. With respect, sir, experience isn't obsolete just because it comes in an older package, Victoria said, meeting his gaze directly. That team is walking into a complex operation with significant unknowns. They're the best trained special operators we've ever fielded, Colonel. They've run simulations for every contingency. Simulations don't bleed, sir. Phillips sighed, the sound heavy with a mixture of frustration and something that might have been regret. Your official reassignment papers come through next week. Training command at Fort Bragg. It's a prestigious position, Victoria. You'll be shaping the next generation. From the field to the classroom. A gilded pasture where aging warhorses could be put out to graze with dignity. Victoria had seen it happen to others before her, had even delivered similar news herself to older officers when she was the rising star. The circle of military life completing itself with brutal efficiency. Until those papers arrive, sir, I'm still the senior tactical advisor for this unit. Advisor being the operative word, Phillips replied, his patience visibly thinning. Not operator, not commander. Your combat days are over, Victoria. The sooner you accept that, the easier this transition will be for everyone. As Phillips walked away, Victoria turned back to the tactical display, studying the terrain where Harrison's team would soon be operating. 26 years of combat experience told her something wasn't right about this mission. The intelligence was too convenient, the target too exposed. It had the subtle markers of a trap she'd seen before in Kandahar, in Mosul, in a dozen other places where good soldiers had died because someone missed the signs, but no one was listening to her warnings anymore. In their eyes, she wasn't Colonel Victoria Vex Caldwell, the legendary tactician who had led some of the most successful counter-terrorism operations of the past 2 decades. She was just another aging officer being phased out, her experience dismissed as outdated, her concerns attributed to an inability to adapt to modern warfare. Victoria checked her watch. Harrison's team would deploy in 90 minutes. She had until then to decide whether to follow orders and stay in her lane, or to trust the instincts that had kept her alive through 6 combat tours. As she weighed her options, she knew one thing. With absolute certainty, age might have slowed her reflexes by milliseconds, but it had sharpened her mind in ways these younger officers couldn't begin to understand. If there was a threat they weren't seeing, she would find it, whether they wanted her help or not. Victoria made her way to the operations center, where analysts monitored global intelligence feeds on a wall of screens. Most of the personnel were decades her junior bright-eyed intelligence specialists with advanced degrees and minimal field experience. They looked up as she entered, their expressions a mixture of respect and confusion. Colonel Caldwell rarely ventured into their domain. A young analyst named Chun stood from her workstation. "Can I help you with something?" "The Kara Mountains region," Victoria said, gesturing to the main display. "Show me all surveillance feeds from the past 72 hours. Chun hesitated, glancing toward her supervisor's empty office. "I'm not sure if your supervisor is Lieutenant Adams, correct? Currently briefing General Phillips on Middle Eastern insurgent movements?" Victoria kept her tone casual, professional. "I outrank him." "The feeds, please." Something in Victoria's demeanor must have conveyed the urgency she felt. Chun nodded, turning to her keyboard. "Yes, ma'am." The main screen filled with satellite imagery of the rugged mountain terrain where Harrison's team would soon be operating. Victoria scanned the time-lapse sequence, looking for the patterns most would miss: subtle movements of vehicles, changes in guard rotations, the telling absence of civilian activity around certain structures. "Slow it down," she instructed. "Focus on the northeastern quadrant, near those rock formations." As Chun adjusted the display, Victoria spotted what she'd been looking for, a brief flash of movement in what should have been an empty ravine. "Freeze that. Enhance." The image sharpened, revealing what appeared to be the glint of metal where none should exist. Victoria felt the familiar tightening in her chest that had saved her life countless times before. "That's a sniper nest. And here," she pointed to another anomaly, "and here. They're setting up a crossfire zone." Chun looked alarmed. "Should I alert Captain Harrison's team?" Victoria considered her options. Protocol dictated that new intelligence be verified through proper channels before operational changes were implemented. By the time that happened, Harrison's team would already be in the air. "Not yet. I need to confirm something first." Victoria turned to another workstation. "Pull up the thermal imaging from last night's pass." The analyst complied, and Victoria studied the heat signatures carefully. What she saw confirmed her suspicions. The target compound showed minimal thermal activity, far less than would be expected for a location supposedly housing the high-value target and his security detail. "They're not there," she murmured. "This is a setup, Colonel Caldwell." The sharp voice from the doorway belonged to Lieutenant Adams, who had returned to find his domain invaded. "May I ask what you're doing with my analysts?" Victoria straightened, unfazed by his obvious displeasure. "Preventing a massacre, Lieutenant. Harrison's team is walking into an ambush." Adams frowned, moving to examine the displays. He was competent, Victoria acknowledged silently, but like most intelligence officers who had never seen combat, he trusted protocols over instinct. "These anomalies are inconclusive at best," he said after reviewing the imagery and questioning. "Verified intelligence this close to deployment creates unnecessary confusion. Confusion is preferable to body bags, Lieutenant." Adams' expression hardened. "With respect, Colonel, this operation has been vetted at the highest levels. The intelligence is solid." "The intelligence is what they want us to see," Victoria countered, pointing to the screen. "This pattern of defensive positions isn't designed to protect a high-value target. It's designed to channel our approach into a kill zone, Colonel." Adams lowered his voice, glancing at the curious analysts pretending not to listen. "General Phillips mentioned you might be having some difficulty adjusting to your advisory role. Perhaps this is an example of what he meant." The dismissal was clear not of her evidence, but of her. Victoria had faced this particular brand of condescension with increasing frequency over the past year. Her concerns weren't being evaluated on merit, but filtered through the perception that she was clinging to relevance. "Contact Harrison," she insisted. Delay the operation until we can verify these discrepancies. I'm not going to disrupt the critical mission based on your intuition." Adams emphasized the last word like it was a relic from a bygone era. "If you have concerns, the proper channel is through General Phillips." Victoria knew what that meant. Phillips would hear her out with that same patronizing patience, then proceed as planned while thanking her for her valuable perspective. Meanwhile, Harrison's team would fly into a trap. "Very well, Lieutenant. I'll pursue the proper channels." Victoria left the operations center, but instead of heading to Phillips' office, she made her way to the communications hub. Master Sergeant Eleanor Rodriguez, one of the few personnel on base who predated even Victoria's tenure, looked up from her console. "Colonel Caldwell," Rodriguez greeted her with a nod. "Haven't seen you down here in a while. Need a secure channel." "Eleanor, direct to Harrison's team." Rodriguez raised an eyebrow but asked no questions. In 22 years of service, she had developed an uncanny ability to read situations. "They're in final prep. Should be on comms for equipment check in about 5 minutes. I'll wait." Rodriguez gestured to an empty workstation in the corner. "Away from the main activity of the hub. Use Station 4. I'll route them to you when they connect." Victoria settled at the terminal, mentally rehearsing what she would say. Harrison was ambitious but not stupid. If she presented the evidence clearly, he might listen. She had to try. The terminal beeped 5 minutes later. "Secure channel established," Rodriguez called from her station. "You've got about 3 minutes before pre-flight checks require their full attention." Victoria activated the connection. "Captain Harrison, this is Colonel Caldwell." There was a pause before Harrison's voice came through, the background noise of pre-mission preparations evident. "Colonel, this is unexpected. I'll be brief. I've identified multiple anomalies in the latest intelligence. The target location shows signs of a prepared ambush, not a high-value target detention site." Another pause, longer this time. "What kind of anomalies?" Victoria outlined her findings concisely, emphasizing the tactical implications. "At minimum, you need to alter your approach vector and insertion point. Ideally, this operation should be delayed for further intelligence verification." "Colonel," Harrison's voice had taken on the careful tone she'd grown to despise, "we appreciate your concern, but we've been through the intelligence thoroughly. General Phillips signed off on this operation personally. Phillips isn't seeing what I'm seeing. With all due respect, ma'am, maybe you're seeing what you want to see." Harrison's voice lowered. "Look, I understand this is difficult. Being on the sidelines when you're used to leading from the front. This isn't about me." "Captain," Victoria cut him off, struggling to keep the frustration from her voice. "It's about keeping your team alive. My team is ready, and the mission is a go. We deploy in 20. Thank you for your input, Colonel." The connection terminated, leaving Victoria staring at the blank screen. She hadn't expected Harrison to immediately abort based on her warning, but she had hoped for more than polite dismissal. Rodriguez approached, her expression sympathetic. "No luck? They think I'm overreaching, trying to insert myself where I don't belong. Their loss," Rodriguez said simply. "Your instincts saved my ass in Fallujah back in '07. I haven't forgotten, even if these kids never knew." Victoria appreciated the sentiment, but it did nothing to resolve her dilemma. She was now faced with a choice, except that her role had been reduced to offering ignored advice, or take more drastic action. As she weighed her options, the intercom system activated. "Colonel Caldwell, report to General Phillips' office immediately." Rodriguez winced. That didn't take long. "Harrison must have reported your call. Apparently proper channels work just fine when they're being used against you," Victoria observed dryly. She made her way to Phillips' office, passing groups of younger officers who fell silent as she approached. Word traveled fast on a military base, and she suspected her reputation was taking yet another hit. The aging colonel who couldn't let go. The has-been who questioned operations she wasn't part of. The relic interfering with the new generation. Phillips was waiting behind his desk, his expression thunderous. "Close the door, Colonel." Victoria complied, then stood at attention, her posture perfect despite the arthritis that occasionally flared. In her lower back, another unwelcome reminder of her advancing years. "Would you care to explain why you directly contacted a deployment team to countermand approved operational parameters?" Phillips demanded without preamble. "I identified critical intelligence oversights that put the team at risk, sir. When Lieutenant Adams refused to relay my concerns through proper channels, I felt obligated to contact Captain Harrison directly." "You felt obligated?" Phillips repeated the words slowly. "Tell me, Victoria, when did your feelings supersede chain of command?" Victoria met Phillips' gaze unflinchingly. "When did protocol supersede protecting our people, sir?" Phillips leaned back in his chair, studying her with a mixture of irritation and something that might have been regret. "You know better than that, Victoria. We have systems in place for a reason. Intelligence is vetted through multiple channels before operational approval." "Systems can fail when they become rigid," Victoria countered. "The intelligence analysis missed critical indicators that I spotted immediately." "That's not ego speaking. That's 26 years of combat experience. Experience that increasingly seems to cloud your judgment rather than clarify it." Phillips stood, moving to the window that overlooked the airfield where Harrison's team was preparing for departure. "You're becoming a disruption, Victoria. This isn't the first time you've questioned command decisions or inserted yourself into operations outside your purview. Because I'm seeing the same mistakes being repeated by a new generation that believes technology can replace human judgment." Phillips turned to face her. "The Joint Chiefs have fast-tracked your reassignment. You'll depart for Fort Bragg tomorrow morning." The news hit Victoria like a physical blow. She had expected the reassignment, but not this swiftly, not as a disciplinary measure rather than a routine transfer. "Sir, Harrison's team is walking into a trap. Delay their deployment by 6 hours. That's all I'm asking." "The decision has been made, Colonel. The operation proceeds as planned." Phillips' tone softened slightly. "Victoria, you've had a distinguished career. Don't tarnish it with insubordination in its final chapter." Final chapter. The words echoed in her mind, underscoring what Phillips and the rest of command truly saw a story reaching its conclusion, a soldier whose usefulness was ending. She thought of all the missions, all the lives saved and lost, all the lessons learned at terrible cost, now dismissed as irrelevant. "Permission to monitor the operation from the command center, sir." Phillips hesitated before nodding. "Granted." "As an observer only. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear, sir." Victoria left Phillips' office with her spine straight and her mind racing. Being right would bring no satisfaction if it meant watching good soldiers die. Being wrong would only confirm what everyone already believed, that she was clinging to relevance, seeing threats where none existed. The command center buzzed with pre-mission activity as Victoria took a position at the back, careful to remain unobtrusive. Multiple screens displayed satellite feeds, drone surveillance, and the vital signs of Harrison's 12-person team. The mission clock showed 30 minutes until insertion. Lieutenant Adams pointedly avoided eye contact when he entered, taking his position at the intelligence console. Victoria noticed several analysts glancing her way, then quickly looking away when she met their eyes. Her reputation had preceded her, the aging colonel making one last desperate grasp at significance. "Team Spectre is airborne," the communications officer announced. "ETA to drop zone 42 minutes. Victoria watched as the operation unfolded according to the approved plan, exactly as she had feared. The helicopters took the southern approach route, avoiding the flooded riverbed, but following a path that would lead them directly into the suspected ambush zones she had identified. 20 minutes into the flight, a young analyst named Torres frowned at his screen. Sir, I'm picking up unusual heat signatures near waypoint Charlie. Adams moved to his station, studying the display. Probably local shepherds. The intelligence assessment noted civilian activity in that sector. Movement pattern doesn't match. Civilian behavior, Torres insisted. It's too coordinated, too purposeful. Victoria bit her tongue, watching as Adams dismissed Torres' concern with the same casual certainty he had used on her. The same willful blindness that prioritized adherence to plan over adaptability. Continue monitoring, Adams instructed, returning to his station. But don't disrupt communications with speculative observations. Torres caught Victoria's eye across the room. She gave him the slightest nod of acknowledgement. She had seen it too. The young analyst hesitated, glancing between his screen and his commanding officer, trapped in the same dilemma Victoria had faced countless times: follow protocol or trust instinct. 10 minutes to insertion, the communications officer announced. Team Spectre beginning final approach. Victoria moved closer to Torres' station, positioning herself to view his screen without drawing attention. The heat signatures had multiplied, now forming a distinct pattern around the planned landing zone. There was no longer any doubt it was an ambush force, patiently waiting as Harrison's team flew directly into their trap. Lieutenant Adams, Torres called, his voice stronger now. I'm registering multiple armed signatures converging on the landing zone. This looks like a prepared welcoming committee. Adams frowned, moving to examine the feed. This time, even he couldn't dismiss the evidence. Communications. Alert Team Spectre. Possible hostile presence at primary LZ. Too late for possible. Victoria muttered, drawing unwanted attention as all eyes turned to her dot. The communications officer relayed the warning, but Harrison's response came back with frustrated clarity. We're committed to the approach. No alternate LZ available within. Mission parameters. Proceeding as planned, weapons hot. Victoria watched in growing horror as the heat signatures on Torres' screen shifted, taking up tactical positions around the landing zone. The trap was about to be sprung, and Harrison was flying right into it despite the warning. They need to abort, she said, louder this time. That's not just a welcoming committee, it's a kill box. Adams shot her a warning look. Colonel, you're here as an observer only. And I'm observing a catastrophe in progress, Victoria replied, moving to the main tactical display. Those aren't random positions. That's a textbook ambush formation, multiple elevated firing positions with overlapping fields of fire, blocking forces to prevent retreat, secondary teams positioned to eliminate survivors. The room fell silent as her assessment registered. Even Adams looked shaken as he recognized the pattern Victoria had pointed out. Communications, order Team Spectre to abort immediately, he commanded, his earlier dismissiveness gone. Repeat, abort mission. The response came through broken and distorted. Taking fire. Heavy resistance. 2 wounded already, cannot reach extraction point. The vital signs monitors began flashing red as team members sustained injuries. Harrison's voice cut through the chaos. We're pinned down. Request immediate extraction. Coordinates to follow. Victoria had seen this scenario play out before a team trapped in hostile territory. Wounded personnel limiting mobility. Extraction impossible without additional support. The conventional response would be to dispatch a quick reaction force. But that would take at least 30 minutes to deploy, time Harrison's team didn't have. They won't survive 30 minutes in that kill zone, Victoria stated. Addressing no one in particular. Phillips had entered the command center during the chaos, his expression grim as he assessed the situation. Prepare QRF for immediate deployment, he ordered. And get me secure communication with Central Command. Victoria caught Torres' eye again. The young analyst subtly tilted his screen toward her, showing a different set of imagery, a narrow ravine approximately 2 kilometers from Harrison's position. It offered a potential extraction route, but one that would require someone with intimate knowledge of the terrain to navigate. "There's another way," Victoria said quietly to Torres. "But no one's going to approve it." Torres understood immediately. "The old smuggler's route through the ravine. It's not on any of our official maps." "Because it's not official," Victoria confirmed. "I found it during an unsanctioned reconnaissance in '09. Used it to extract a compromised asset after conventional routes were blocked." "You'd need someone who knows it firsthand," Torres observed. "Someone who's actually been there." Victoria nodded, making her decision. "Cover for me. I need 10 minutes head start before anyone notices I'm gone." Torres looked alarmed. "Colonel, you can't seriously be thinking." "I'm not thinking, Specialist. I'm acting." Victoria glanced toward Phillips, who was deep in conversation with Adams and the QRF commander. "Sometimes the only way to prove you're right is to do what everyone says you can't." Torres hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'll create a distraction in the environmental systems. It should buy you about 15 minutes before security protocols reset." Victoria gave him a grateful nod before slipping out of the command center, moving with the purposeful stride of someone with clear authorization. In the chaos of the compromised mission, few would question a senior officer moving with determination. Her first stop was the armory, where she used her still valid security clearance to access equipment that, officially, she had no business requisitioning. The young armory officer raised an eyebrow at her requests, but processed them without question, another benefit of the silver eagles on her collar. Next came the motor pool, where she commandeered a lightweight tactical vehicle, using the emergency deployment codes that hadn't yet been revoked from her credentials. Within 12 minutes of leaving the command center, Victoria was approaching the perimeter checkpoint, her mind completely clear for the first time in months. No more second-guessing, no more deferring to younger officers who dismissed her experience. She was back in her element, acting decisively when others hesitated. The guard at the checkpoint looked surprised to see a full colonel driving a tactical vehicle alone. "Ma'am, I don't have you on the deployment roster." "Special authorization from General Phillips," Victoria replied, projecting absolute certainty. "Emergency extraction support for Team Spectre. You should be receiving confirmation shortly." The guard hesitated, glancing at his communications panel. "I don't have anything yet. Son, there are 12 operators pinned down under heavy fire. Every second you delay could cost lives." Victoria fixed him with the commanding stare that had served her well for decades. "You can either let me through now, or explain to General Phillips why you countermanded his direct order." The guard wavered under Victoria's unwavering gaze, then stepped back with a sharp nod. "Yes, ma'am. Proceed." Victoria accelerated through the checkpoint, knowing the deception would be discovered within minutes. By then, she'd be beyond the base perimeter and committed to a course from which there was no return. The digital dashboard clock read 11:47, approximately 20 minutes since Harrison's team had reported taking heavy fire. Every second counted now. The tactical vehicle handled the rough terrain easily as Victoria navigated from memory, avoiding the main roads where she might encounter other military vehicles. Her destination was a narrow canyon 18 kilometers northeast of the base, one of several unofficial entry points she had mapped during her earlier deployments to the region. Points deliberately kept off official records to preserve their tactical value. As she drove, Victoria activated the vehicle's secure communication system, tuning to the encrypted frequency Harrison's team was using. The transmission was fragmented, filled with the sounds of gunfire and shouted commands. Northwest corner is too hot. Can single quotes T move Wilson. Need suppressive fire on the ridge. Victoria recognized Harrison's voice, strained but controlled. Good. If he was still issuing coherent orders, the situation wasn't completely unsalvageable. She keyed the transmitter but hesitated. Announcing her presence prematurely would only distract them and potentially reveal her position to the enemy forces. Better to assess the situation first, then communicate once she had something concrete to offer. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as she approached the canyon, forcing her to abandon the vehicle in a concealed position between two rock formations. Victoria quickly gathered her equipment: lightweight body armor, a customized M4 carbine with a suppressor, her old combat knife, night vision equipment, and a medical kit. The gear felt immediately familiar, like greeting an old friend. Her knees protested as she began the climb up the steep canyon wall, a reminder of the decades of hard use she'd put her body through. Victoria pushed the discomfort aside, focusing on the mission parameters. According to Torres intel, Harrison's team was pinned down approximately 1.8 kilometers from her current position. The ravine she intended to use as an extraction route would bring her within 400 meters of their location, allowing her to approach undetected if she moved carefully. Reaching the top of the canyon, Victoria paused to orient herself. The distant sound of gunfire echoed across the landscape, interspersed with the distinctive thump of grenade launchers. The battle was still raging, which meant Harrison's team was still fighting, still alive. Victoria moved with practiced efficiency, her pace measured to conserve energy while covering ground quickly. Age might have diminished her raw speed, but it had enhanced her movement economy. No wasted motion, no unnecessary risks. Each step was placed with deliberate precision, each pause used to scan for threats and recalibrate her route. After 30 minutes of careful navigation, she reached the ravine that would serve as her approach route. From her elevated position, Victoria could now see the ambush site, a natural depression surrounded by rocky ridges that provided perfect cover for the attacking force. Harrison's team had been funneled into the depression and now faced fire from at least 3 directions. Victoria pulled out her compact binoculars, scanning the enemy positions methodically. She counted at least 20 attackers, well armed, and using coordinated fire patterns that suggested professional training rather than typical insurgent tactics. This wasn't a random ambush, it was a deliberate operation designed to eliminate Harrison's team with minimal risk to the attacking force. More concerning was the positioning. The attackers had established overlapping fields of fire that made conventional extraction impossible. Any helicopter attempting to reach Harrison's position would be shot down before it could land. The QRF would face the same killing field if they attempted a direct approach. Victoria focused her binoculars on Harrison's position, identifying the remaining operational team members. 3 were clearly wounded, including Harrison himself, who appeared to be nursing an injury to his left arm. The team had established a defensive perimeter using the limited cover available, but they were burning through ammunition quickly and had no clear path to escape. Clicking her radio to the command frequency, Victoria heard Philip's voice issuing orders for the QRF deployment. Approach from the south, using air support to suppress the ridge positions. Victoria shook her head. The southern approach was exactly what the ambush force would be expecting. The QRF would suffer heavy casualties before they could reach Harrison's team. She switched back to the team's tactical frequency. Spectre lead, this is Colonel Caldwell. Do you copy? Silence, then Harrison's surprised voice. Colonel, how are you on this frequency? Where are you? I'm approximately 400 meters northeast of your position. I can see 3 enemy positions overlooking your location. What's your status? Harrison's response was immediate, professional, despite the obvious shock at hearing her voice. 3 men critically wounded, including Wilson and Ramirez. 4 with moderate injuries, including myself. 5 still combat effective, ammunition at 30%. Enemy has us surrounded on 3 sides. What about the eastern approach? Through the narrow gully? Negative. They have a heavy machine gun position covering that sector. We tried breaking through there 15 minutes ago, lost Ramirez in the attempt. Victoria adjusted her assessment. The enemy force was more numerous than she had initially calculated and better positioned. A frontal assault, even with the element of surprise, would be suicide for a single operator, regardless of experience. But Victoria hadn't survived 26 years of combat by relying on frontal assaults. She studied the terrain again, noting a peculiar feature in the rocky formations behind the machine gun position Harrison had mentioned. A natural chimney in the rock face, barely visible unless you knew exactly what to look for. It would be a challenging climb, especially for someone her age, but it would position her directly above the machine gun nest. Spectre lead. Maintain your position and conserve ammunition. Help is coming. Colonel, what are you planning? Harrison's voice had taken on a new note, realization mixing with disbelief. Are you alone out there? Sometimes one is enough, Captain. Stand by. Victoria stowed her binoculars and began moving toward the rock chimney, staying low and using the natural contours of the terrain for cover. Her breathing remained steady, her movements deliberate. The arthritis in her hands flared as she began the climb, fingers seeking purchase in the narrow crevices of the rock face. 20 years ago, she would have ascended in half the time, but what she lacked in raw physical power, she made up for in technique and precision. 15 meters up, Victoria paused at a narrow ledge, using it to reassess the battlefield from her new vantage point. The machine gun position was now visible. 3 men operating a mounted weapon that commanded a sweeping field of fire across the eastern escape route. Behind them, partially concealed by a rock outcropping, was what appeared to be their command position. 2 men with communication equipment, coordinating the overall ambush. Victoria calculated distances and angles, factoring in wind speed and the declining light as dusk approached. 5 targets. Limited ammunition, no room for error. She would have exactly 1 chance to disrupt the ambush force enough to create an extraction window for Harrison's team. The old familiar calm settled over her, the mental state that had carried her through the worst combat situations of her career. Her heart rate slowed, her senses sharpened, and the doubts that had plagued her for months evaporated like morning mist. Age became irrelevant. All that mattered was the mission, the objective, the next move in a deadly chess game where the stakes were measured in lives. Victoria checked her weapon 1 final time, then resumed her climb toward the position that would give her the tactical advantage no one believed she could still achieve. It was time to remind everyone why Colonel Victoria Vex Caldwell had once been the most feared special operations commander in the theater. The final 10 meters of the climb tested Victoria's endurance, forcing her to rely on decades of muscle memory rather than raw strength. As she pulled herself onto the narrow ledge above the machine gun nest, a sharp pain lanced through her left shoulder, an old injury from a helicopter crash in Kosovo, flaring up at the worst possible moment. Victoria remained motionless, controlling her breathing as she waited for the pain to subside. 3 meters below, and slightly to her right, the enemy machine gun team remained focused on Harrison's position, unaware of her presence. Victoria removed a small mirror from her tactical vest, using it to observe the gunner and his 2 support personnel without exposing her position. Their setup was professional, the gunner behind the weapon, 1 man feeding ammunition, the 3rd providing security and communication with the other teams. All 3 wore body armor and communicated via hand signals rather than radio, indicating professional training far beyond typical insurgent levels. Reaching into her vest, Victoria retrieved a small canister, an experimental flashbang grenade designed for special operations. Unlike standard models, this version created a concentrated effect in a smaller radius, ideal for the confined space of the machine gun nest. She mentally mapped her attack sequence: grenade first, then target the security man who would likely react fastest, followed by the gunner, and finally the ammunition handler. Victoria keyed her radio once, a brief signal to Harrison that the operation was commencing. No words, just enough to alert him that something was about to happen. Then she pulled the pin on the grenade, counted 2 seconds, and dropped it precisely into the center of the machine. Gun position. The flashbang detonated with a concentrated burst of light and sound. Victoria was already moving, sliding down from her position as the disoriented enemies struggled to respond. Her first shot took the security man through the junction of neck and shoulder, dropping him instantly. The second and third shots hit the gunner center mass, the impact throwing him backward against the rock wall. The ammunition handler had managed to draw his sidearm despite the disorientation, but Victoria's fourth shot caught him in the chest. Before he could fire, 3 targets neutralized in under 4 seconds. Victoria quickly secured the position, confirming that all 3 enemies were incapacitated. The machine gun, an aging Russian PKM model, was still operational. Victoria quickly assessed the remaining ammunition, approximately 200 rounds in the current belt with 2 more boxes nearby. Enough for what she needed. "Spectre lead, this is Caldwell," she transmitted, keeping her voice low. "Eastern machine gun position neutralized. Stand by for suppressive fire on the northern ridge positions. Prepare to move your wounded on my signal." Harrison's response was immediate, his tone reflecting newfound respect. "Copy that, Colonel." Standing by. Victoria repositioned the machine gun, angling it toward the northern ridge where she had observed at least 6 enemy fighters commanding the high ground over Harrison's team. The enemy forces had clearly registered the loss of their eastern position. She could see movement as they adjusted to this unexpected development. They would be searching for the threat, expecting a flanking element from Harrison's team rather than a single operator. She waited until the enemy fighters began to concentrate their attention on the eastern approach, then opened fire with the captured machine gun. The weapon roared to life, suppressive fire raking across the ridge positions and forcing the enemy to seek cover. Victoria didn't expect to neutralize many targets with this maneuver. The distance was too great for precision. Fire, but that wasn't the objective. She needed to create confusion, to disrupt the enemy's coordinated fire long enough for Harrison to move his wounded. "Move now, Captain," she ordered between bursts of fire. "Bring your wounded through the eastern gully. You have approximately 90 seconds before they reorganize." Through her peripheral vision, Victoria saw Harrison's team begin to move, the uninjured operators helping their wounded comrades toward the narrow passage that had previously been covered by the machine gun. The enemy forces on the northern ridge attempted to return fire, but Victoria's suppressive barrage kept them pinned down. Unable to effectively target the moving squad, Victoria maintained fire until the ammunition belt ran dry, then quickly reloaded with practiced efficiency, her fingers working through the familiar sequence, despite the years since she had last operated this particular weapon. As she resumed fire, she noticed movement to her west, 2 enemy fighters attempting to flank her position, likely sent to investigate the loss of the machine gun team. Without breaking rhythm on the machine gun, Victoria drew her sidearm with her left hand, waiting until the approaching fighters were within effective range. Her first shot missed, a reminder that dual-wielding weapons was more challenging at 48 than it had been at 28, but her second and third shots found their marks. 1 fighter went down immediately. The second took cover behind a boulder. Victoria calculated her remaining ammunition and options. The machine gun had perhaps 50 rounds left, not enough to maintain suppressive fire for long. Harrison's team was halfway through the gully, moving as quickly as possible with their wounded, but still vulnerable. The remaining enemy fighter behind the boulder represented an immediate threat that could compromise the entire extraction. Making her decision, Victoria fired a final burst from the machine gun, deliberately aiming high to maintain suppression without wasting precious ammunition. Then she abandoned the position, moving laterally across the rocky terrain toward the boulder where the enemy fighter had taken cover. Age and experience taught patience. Victoria didn't rush the approach, knowing that the fighter would be expecting a frontal assault. Instead, she circled wide, using the fading daylight and scattered rocks as concealment. Her breathing remained controlled, her movements economical. When she was approximately 15 meters from the boulder, she removed a combat knife from her boot, the same knife she had carried since her first deployment. Its grip worn smooth from years of use. The fighter made his mistake exactly as Victoria had anticipated. After 30 seconds without contact, he cautiously peered around the edge of the boulder, expecting Victoria to approach from the direction of the machine gun nest. She was already moving, closing the distance in a silent rush. That belied her years. The knife entered just below the fighter's ribcage with surgical precision, a killing strike taught to her by a Nepalese Gurkha instructor 23 years earlier. Victoria caught the fighter's weight as he collapsed, lowering him silently to the ground. No noise to alert the remaining enemy positions. She quickly retrieved his radio, listening to the frantic communications as the ambush force tried to understand what was happening. Their carefully planned trap was unraveling. The coordinated fire positions now disconnected and responding reactively rather than proactively. "Colonel, we're through the gully." Harrison's voice came through her earpiece. 7 of us mobile, 5 requiring assistance. What's your position? Victoria surveyed the battlefield from her new vantage point. The QRF would still be at least 15 minutes out, too long to risk remaining in the open. Continue east for 200 meters until you reach a dry creek bed. Follow it north. I'll rendezvous with you at the rock formation that resembles a camel. Copy that. And Colonel ... thank you. Victoria allowed herself a grim smile as she collected ammunition from the fallen fighter. The battle was far from over, but the momentum had shifted. Harrison's team was moving away from the kill zone, and the enemy force was now dividing its attention between pursuing them and identifying the unexpected threat that had disrupted their ambush. She checked her watch, almost 40 minutes since she had left the base. By now, Phillips would be fully aware of her unauthorized departure. The QRF would have orders concerning her as well as Harrison's team, though she couldn't guess whether those orders involved arresting her or simply bringing her back safely. Either way, she needed to complete this mission on her own terms. Victoria moved quickly but carefully toward the rendezvous point, mentally calculating the remaining threats. Based on her observations, the enemy force still numbered at least 12 fighters, possibly more if they had reserves positioned elsewhere. They would be regrouping, adapting their strategy to this new development. The critical question was whether they would commit to pursuing Harrison's team or cut their losses and withdraw. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The answer came sooner than expected. As Victoria approached the dry creek bed, she observed 4 enemy fighters moving parallel to Harrison's likely route, attempting to get ahead of the retreating squad and establish another ambush position. They were moving fast, unencumbered by wounded comrades, and would reach the choke point before Harrison's team cleared the area. Victoria had a split-second decision to make: continue to the rendezvous point as planned or intercept the flanking element before they could establish their position. Experience made the choice clear. She altered her course, moving to intersect the enemy fighters before they could threaten Harrison's escape route. The terrain between Victoria and the flanking fighters offered minimal cover, scattered rocks and sparse vegetation that would conceal her approach only if she moved with extreme care. 4 against 1 were poor odds under any circumstances, but especially problematic when the 4 were moving together in a tactical formation that suggested formal military training. Victoria studied their movement pattern from behind a weathered boulder, Two lead fighters advanced in a staggered pattern, while two rear guards maintained spacing that optimized their fields of fire. They moved with the confidence of professionals who believed they held the tactical advantage, unaware they were being hunted. Instead of engaging directly, Victoria circled to approach from the east, using the setting sun to her advantage. The fighters would be looking toward the gully where Harrison's team was moving, their eyes adjusting to the growing shadows. They wouldn't be expecting a threat from the direction of the harsh sunlight. Victoria reached into her tactical vest and removed a small metal object, a weathered compass that had accompanied her through 6 combat deployments. She positioned it carefully on a rock where the sun's rays caught it, creating a brief flash of reflected light. Then she moved 20 meters to her right, settling into a firing position behind a gnarled desert shrub. The effect was immediate. One of the rear guards spotted the reflection, alerting his team with a hand signal. 2 fighters immediately changed direction to investigate, while the other 2 maintained their course, adapting their formation to cover the potential threat. While continuing their flanking maneuver, perfect, Victoria had effectively split their force without firing a shot. She waited until the 2 investigating fighters were fully committed to their approach, focusing on the point where they had seen the reflection. When they were approximately 30 meters from her actual position, Victoria took her shot. The first fighter dropped immediately, a clean shot through the upper cervical spine, a target most younger snipers would avoid due to its difficulty, but one Victoria had mastered through thousands of hours of practice before this second fighter could properly register what had happened. Victoria had already adjusted her aim. Her next shot caught him in the hip joint as he began to turn, not immediately fatal, but instantly incapacitating. He fell, his weapon clattering against the rocky ground. The remaining 2 fighters reacted with professional speed, seeking cover and scanning for the source of the attack. Victoria remained perfectly still, controlling her breathing as she had been taught by a legendary Marine Scout sniper during joint operations training in the early 2000s. Movement caught the eye faster than forma, lesson she had internalized decades ago. One of the fighters attempted to establish communication with his fallen comrades, exposing his position slightly. Victoria's shot struck him in the shoulder junction, the impact spinning him out of his cover. Her follow-up shot ensured he wouldn't rejoin the fight. The last fighter was more cautious, keeping low and using available cover effectively. Victoria could have waited him out. Patience was, after all, one of the virtues age had strengthened, but Harrison's team was moving closer. Any extended engagement risked exposing them during their most vulnerable moment. Victoria reached into her vest again, this time removing a small stone she had picked up during her approach through the ravine. With a precisely calculated toss, she sent it arcing through the air to land several meters beyond the fighter's position. The subtle sound of it striking the ground was enough to draw his attention momentarily, a quarter-second window that Victoria exploited with clinical efficiency. 4 threats neutralized in under 2 minutes. Victoria quickly secured their weapons and communication equipment, then checked their identities. The fighters carried no identification, but their equipment was high-end and standardized further, evidence of professional training rather than typical insurgent resources. Spectre lead, this is Caldwell, she transmitted. 4-man flanking element neutralized along your escape route. Continue on your current heading. Harrison's response came through, his voice tight with the strain of the situation but maintaining professional composure. Copy that, Colonel. We're moving as fast as possible with the wounded. Ada to the creek bed. 5 minutes. Understood. I'll secure the rendezvous point. Victoria advanced toward the camel-shaped rock formation, moving more rapidly now that the immediate threat had been eliminated. Her left knee protested the pace and old parachuting injury from a night jump gone wrong over Serbia, but she pushed through the discomfort with practiced determination. As she approached the rendezvous point, Victoria's tactical assessment continued automatically. The remaining enemy fighters would be regrouping, potentially bringing in reinforcements if available. The QRF would be approaching from the south, still at least 10 minutes out, based on standard response protocols. The narrow window for extraction was closing rapidly. "Colonel Caldwell, this is General Phillips." The voice in her earpiece was clipped, professionally neutral despite the extraordinary circumstances. "Your position has been identified via satellite. QRF is en route to your coordinates." Victoria maintained her focus on securing the rendezvous point, scanning for potential threats as she replied. "Good to hear, General. Harrison's team has 12 personnel, 5 wounded, 2 critical. They'll need immediate medical evacuation." "Understood." Phillips paused, and Victoria could almost see him choosing his next words carefully. "The Joint Chiefs have been briefed on the situation. Your initiative has been noted." "I'm sure it has, sir." Victoria spotted movement to the northwest. Harrison's team appearing at the edge of the creek bed, moving in tactical formation despite their wounded. "We can discuss my retirement paperwork after these men are safely back on base." Phillips didn't respond immediately. When he did, his tone had shifted slightly. "The QRF commander reports continued enemy activity between their position and yours. They're encountering resistance approximately 2 kilometers south of your location." Victoria, process this information quickly. If the enemy force had enough personnel to engage the QRF, while still potentially pursuing Harrison's team, the situation was even more precarious than she had initially assessed. "Tell the QRF to hold position. We'll come to them." "That's not protocol, Colonel." "Neither was this entire operation, General." Victoria watched as Harrison's team approached, noting their disciplined movement despite obvious exhaustion. "But we're all still alive, which suggests protocols might need revision." Harrison reached her position, offering a crisp salute despite his wounded arm. "Colonel, good to see you in person." Victoria returned the salute, then immediately helped stabilize one of the critically wounded operators. "Save the formalities for the base, Captain. We need to move these men 2 kilometers south to rendezvous with the QRF. They're encountering resistance and holding position." Harrison nodded, the earlier skepticism completely absent from his expression. "Yes, ma'am." "What's your assessment of our route?" The question struck Victoria like a physical blow, not because it was unexpected, but because it represented a fundamental shift. 8 hours ago, this same officer had dismissed her tactical analysis as the overreaching of Nkoga. Aging has been. Now he was deferring to her judgment without hesitation. "We'll follow the eastern ridge line," she decided, pointing toward a rocky escarpment that paralleled the creek bed. "It offers better cover and defensive positions if we encounter opposition. I'll take point. Put your best shooter on rear guard." "That would be Specialist Rivera." Harrison indicated a young woman who was helping a wounded comrade. "She's got the highest qualification scores in the unit." Victoria nodded approvingly. "Good, let's move out. Keep spacing tight but maintain clear fields of fire. These aren't typical insurgents we're dealing with." As the team reorganized for movement, Victoria checked her ammunition and mentally mapped their route to the QRF position. Every decision now balanced multiple competing factors: the speed necessary to reach medical aid for the wounded, the caution required to avoid further engagement with a superior force, the terrain considerations that might offer tactical advantages. This complex, multi-dimensional problem-solving under pressure was precisely where Victoria's decades of experience provided an edge that no training simulation or theoretical exercise could replicate. The wisdom of 26 years in combat wasn't measured in physical metrics or fitness tests. It lived in the neural pathways that connected observation to analysis to decision almost instantaneously. The team moved out with practiced efficiency, Victoria setting a pace that balanced urgency with caution. Years of command experience had taught her to read the subtle signs of her unit's condition, the slightly labored breathing of the man carrying Wilson on an improvised stretcher, the careful way Rivera scanned their backtrail, the disciplined silence of operators who understood that sound discipline could mean the difference between life and death. "Colonel," Harrison moved alongside her as they navigated a particularly rocky section of the ridge. "Our intel was completely wrong about this operation. These aren't local insurgents. Their tactics, equipment, coordination, there's something else entirely." Victoria nodded, her eyes continuously scanning the terrain ahead. Military contractors most likely. Possibly former special forces from Eastern Europe or South Africa, based on their movement patterns. Someone wanted your team eliminated badly enough to hire professionals. But why? This was supposed to be a straightforward capture of a regional bomb maker. Exactly. Supposed to be. The question is who fed that intelligence to our analysts, and what they hoped to accomplish by eliminating your team specifically. Victoria paused, raising a closed fist to halt the column as she studied a narrow pass ahead. After determining it was clear, she signaled the team forward again. Too early to draw conclusions, but it points to a serious compromise in our intelligence channels. Harrison absorbed this with a troubled expression. "You suspected from the beginning, didn't you? That's why you tried to warn us." "I recognize the pattern. I've seen similar setups in Ukraine in 2018 and Syria in 2021. The intelligence is too clean, too convenient. Real intelligence is messy, contradictory, requires interpretation." Victoria's voice remained steady despite the exertion of the rapid movement. "Experience teaches you to recognize the difference between genuine intel and a carefully constructed narrative designed to lead you exactly where someone wants you to go." A sound from their left flank caused Victoria to freeze, signaling the team to take cover. She tilted her head slightly, focusing her attention on identifying the source. After 20 seconds of complete stillness, she relaxed marginally. "Rock slide. Natural, not man-made. Continue moving." As they resumed their advance, Victoria noted Harrison watching her with undisguised reassessment. The skepticism that had colored their earlier interactions had been replaced by something approaching respect. She'd seen this transformation countless times before, the shift that occurred when younger operators witnessed firsthand the value of experience over raw physical capability. 500 meters to QRF position, Victoria announced after consulting her GPS. "They're holding at the southern entrance to the canyon system. Expect potential contact before we reach them." As if summoned by her words, the distinctive crack of rifle fire echoed from ahead, followed by the heavier sound of the QRF's vehicle-mounted weapons returning fire. Victoria immediately directed the team toward a defensible position among the larger rock formations. "Rivera," she called to the rear guard, "move up. I need your eyes." The young specialist joined her at the forward position, removing a compact spotting scope from her equipment. Victoria nodded approvingly at the well-maintained instrument. "What do you see?" Rivera scanned the terrain methodically, her movements indicating formal sniper training. "QRF is in good cover, 3 vehicles in diamond formation. They're taking fire from elevated positions on both sides of the canyon entrance. I count at least 6 shooters, maybe more concealed." Victoria studied the situation through her own binoculars, mentally calculating angles and distances. "They're trying to keep the QRF pinned while maneuvering to engage us from behind. Classic hammer and anvil." "We're caught in the middle," Harrison observed grimly. "No," Victoria corrected. "We're exactly where we need to be to disrupt their strategy. They've committed to a 2-front engagement without realizing we have the high ground between their positions." She turned to Rivera. "What's your preferred weapon system, specialist?" "SR-25 marksman rifle, ma'am. Semi-automatic, effective range 800 meters with my customizations." Victoria nodded. "Good. You and I are going to provide overwatch while Captain Harrison leads the wounded to the QRF position. We'll suppress the Eastern Ridge firing positions. Create a corridor for movement. Harrison looked concerned. Colonel, with respect, I should stay with the overwatch element. My arm is injured, which makes you more valuable leading the main element. Victoria cut him off efficiently. Rivera and I will be more effective as a two-person team. Mobility and communication are priorities now, not command hierarchy. Harrison recognized the tactical logic and nodded his acceptance. Yes, ma'am. Victoria and Rivera quickly established a firing position on a rocky outcropping that provided excellent sight lines to the enemy positions, engaging the QRF. Victoria checked her weapon, making minute adjustments based on the wind conditions and elevation. On my mark, we engage the two rightmost shooters simultaneously, she instructed Rivera. I'll take the one behind the twisted tree. You take the one using the boulder as cover. Ready? Rivera settled into position, her breathing slowing as she prepared for the shot. Ready, ma'am. 3, 2, 1, mark. Their shots rang out in perfect synchronization. Victoria's target dropped immediately. Rivera's attempted to crawl to different cover before a follow-up shot eliminated the threat. The remaining enemy fighters immediately redirected some of their fire toward this new threat, exactly as Victoria had anticipated. Maintain suppressive fire on those positions, Victoria instructed Rivera. Make them keep their heads down. Don't waste ammunition on low-probability shots. She keyed her radio. Harrison, begin movement now. We've drawn their attention, and the QRF is providing covering fire from the south. Moving, Harrison confirmed. Victoria watched as he led the team. In a controlled advance, using available cover efficiently while maintaining protection for the wounded. Their progress was steady despite the difficult terrain and enemy fire. Rivera continued to provide precisely placed shots that kept the enemy force reacting rather than coordinating. Victoria alternated between supporting fire and observing the overall battlefield, making tactical adjustments as needed. When one enemy fighter attempted to reposition to a better vantage point, Victoria's shot caught him in mid-movement. Colonel, Rivera said without taking her eye from her scope, 2 targets moving to flank our position from the west. Distance? 300 meters in closing. Using the drainage channel for cover, Victoria made a quick decision. Continue. Suppressing the ridge positions. I'll handle the flanking element. She moved to a secondary position 20 meters west of their original location, settling behind a rock formation that offered both cover and a clear view of the drainage channel. Victoria regulated her breathing, allowing her heart rate to slow. Despite the urgency of the situation, the first flanker appeared exactly where she expected, moving with the practiced caution of a trained operator. Her shot caught him center mass, the impact driving him backward into the channel. The second fighter was more cautious, using his fallen comrade's position to gauge Victoria's location. He remained in cover, occasionally firing blind suppression toward her general area. Victoria remained patient, knowing that the longer he stayed pinned, the more time Harrison had to reach the QRF's position. Her radio crackled. Colonel, this is Harrison. We've reached the QRF perimeter. Medical teams are working on the wounded. What's your status? Still engaged, Victoria replied calmly. We'll hold position until you've secured the wounded, then execute our own extraction. Negative, Colonel. We're sending a team to support your withdrawal. Victoria smiled slightly at the reversal. Now Harrison was concerned for her safety. Unnecessary, Captain. Focus on your wounded. We'll manage our extraction. The second flanker finally made his mistake, shifting position slightly to attempt a better angle of fire. Victoria's shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him out of cover. Her follow-up shot ensured he wouldn't return to the fight. Rivera, Victoria called, returning to their primary position. Situation update. Enemy fire decreasing, ma'am. I think they're beginning to withdraw now that they've lost the element of surprise, and their numerical advantage is compromised. Victoria nodded, scanning the battlefield. The QRF had begun to advance toward the canyon entrance, pushing the remaining enemy fighters back. Harrison's wounded were being loaded into medical evacuation vehicles. The operation was transitioning from active combat to security and extraction. Time to move, Victoria decided. We'll withdraw to the QRF position using covered movement. I'll take point, you follow at 5-meter intervals. As they began their careful descent from the ridgeline, Victoria's radio came to life again, this time with General Phillips' voice. Colonel Caldwell, situation report. Mission accomplished, sir, Victoria replied simply. Harrison's team is with the QRF. Specialist Rivera and I are withdrawing from overwatch positions. Enemy forces in retreat. A pause then. Well done, Colonel. Report to my office immediately upon return to base. Victoria couldn't help but smile at the formal tone that couldn't quite mask Philip's astonishment. Copy that, sir. Though I should warn you, my retirement paperwork might need revision. The return to Fort Reynolds carried none of the secrecy of Victoria's unauthorized departure. The convoy moved through the main gate with lights flashing, drawing attention from personnel across the base. Medical teams rushed forward to transfer the wounded to the base hospital, while security forces established a perimeter around the vehicles. Victoria stepped down from the tactical transport, her uniform dust-covered and blood-stained, but her posture impeccable. Harrison approached as medics worked on his injured arm. Colonel, I owe you an apology. Victoria raised an eyebrow. For dismissing my tactical assessment, ignoring my warning, or underestimating me because of my age, Captain. All of the above, ma'am. Harrison met her gaze directly. I was wrong. We all were. Age doesn't determine capability, Captain. That's the lesson here. Victoria surveyed the organized chaos around them, the wounded being treated, intelligence officers debriefing the uninjured team members, technical specialists examining captured enemy equipment. Experience isn't obsolete just because it comes in an older package. I won't forget it, Harrison promised. Neither will my team. A senior medical officer approached, eyeing Victoria with professional concern. Colonel, you should be checked for injuries as well. Victoria dismissed the suggestion with a slight shake of her head. I'm fine, doctor. Focus on those who need your attention. With respect, ma'am, you've just completed a combat operation, a T. The doctor hesitated, clearly trying to find a diplomatic phrasing. At my advanced age? Victoria supplied with dry amusement. I've been doing this since you were in medical school, doctor. I know when I need treatment. The doctor recognized the futility of arguing and nodded respectfully before returning to the wounded. Victoria turned toward headquarters, where she knew Phillips would be waiting. As she walked across the base, she noticed personnel stopping to watch her pass, some with open curiosity, others with newfound respect. Word traveled quickly in military installations, and by now, everyone knew what Colonel Caldwell had accomplished. Phillips was standing at the window when Victoria entered. His office, still in her dust-covered combat gear. He turned slowly, his expression unreadable as he took in her appearance. You look like hell, Victoria. Combat does that, sir. Phillips gestured to a chair, but Victoria remained standing. Her knee was throbbing after the day's exertion, but some principles were worth the discomfort. Phillips acknowledged her choice with a slight nod, then moved to stand behind his desk. I've just finished a video conference with the Joint Chiefs, he began, his tone carefully neutral. They're very interested in today's events, particularly in how a colonel scheduled for reassignment managed to single-handedly disrupt an enemy operation that had neutralized one of our best special operations teams. I had assistance, sir. Specialist Rivera is an exceptional soldier. Yes, I've noted that in my preliminary report. Phillips studied her for a long moment. What you did today violated direct orders, breached operational security protocols, and undermined the chain of command. By all regulatory standards, I should be preparing court-martial proceedings rather than commendations. Victoria met his gaze steadily. If saving 12 lives constitutes a court-martial offense, sir, I'll accept those charges without complaint. That's just it, Victoria. You've put us in an impossible position. Phillips picked up a folder from his desk. How do we discipline an officer for insubordination when that same insubordination resulted in a successful rescue that our approved protocols failed to achieve? Perhaps the protocols need examination, sir, not the officer who recognized their limitations. Phillips almost smiled. The same argument you've been making for the past year. He opened the folder, removing a document that Victoria recognized as her reassignment orders. These arrived this morning. Training command at Fort Bragg, effective immediately. Victoria nodded, having long accepted this outcome. I'll begin transitioning my responsibilities today. No, you won't. Phillips tore the document in half. The gesture deliberate and uncharacteristically theatrical for his usually reserved demeanor. The Joint Chiefs have rescinded your reassignment, pending a complete review of today's operation and its implications for special operations protocols. Victoria carefully controlled her expression, but surprise must have shown despite her efforts. Phillips continued. Initial intelligence assessment suggests we're dealing with a sophisticated operation, targeting our special forces capability in this region. Someone compromised our intelligence channels to lure Harrison's team into an ambush, which means we have a serious security breach. I suspected as much, Victoria confirmed. The ambush was too well coordinated, the enemy force too professional for typical insurgent operations. Exactly. Which is why I need someone with experience identifying these patterns. Phillips' tone shifted subtly. Someone who can see threats that our younger analysts might miss. Someone who values effectiveness over protocol when lives are at stake. Victoria understood what he was offering. A new assignment? Special Operations Intelligence. Assessment Unit. You'll lead a team responsible for validating intelligence before operations are approved. Full authority to flag concerns directly to command level without intermediaries. Phillips allowed himself a small smile. Consider it a new protocol, the Caldwell Protocol, perhaps. Experience as a check against technological overconfidence. Victoria considered the proposal. It wasn't a return to field operations, her actions today notwithstanding. She recognized that her combat days were genuinely numbered. But it was something potentially more valuable, a role that institutionalized the very experience and judgment that had been systematically devalued. And Rivera? Victoria asked. I want her on my team, already approved. Along with that analyst. Who helped you, Torres, I believe. Phillips' expression turned wry. He's facing his own disciplinary review for aiding your unauthorized departure. He saw what others missed. That deserves recognition, not punishment. A compelling argument from someone who just committed multiple violations of military protocol. Phillips closed the folder. Your new team will assemble tomorrow at 0800. Until then, I suggest you get some rest. Even legendary colonels need recovery time. Victoria finally allowed herself to sit, the adrenaline of the past hours fading into bone-deep weariness. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. You've created quite the precedent. Every aging officer on this base will now cite the Caldwell operation when facing reassignment. Only the ones who can still outperform their younger counterparts, Victoria replied with quiet confidence. 3 weeks later, Victoria stood before her newly formed team in a converted briefing room that now served as their operational center. Maps and intelligence reports covered the walls. Multiple computer stations displayed real-time data feeds, and a central table held the current operation under review. This insertion plan relies too heavily on satellite intelligence, Victoria was explaining to a mixed group of seasoned veterans and promising younger analysts. Satellite imagery missed the defensive positions in the Harrison operation, and it could miss similar threats here. We need human intelligence confirmation. Before approval. Captain Harrison, his arm still in a sling but otherwise recovered, nodded in agreement. Colonel Caldwell's right. The thermal imaging looks clean, but that could be deliberately manipulated. We saw those tactics in the ambush. The planning. Team initially resistant to this additional layer of scrutiny had quickly recognized the value of Victoria's experience-driven insights. 3 operations had already been modified based on her team's assessment, each adjustment proven justified by subsequent intelligence data. As the briefing concluded, Victoria noticed General Phillips observing from the doorway. She joined him after dismissing the team. The Caldwell Protocol is proving its worth, Phillips acknowledged. The Joint Chiefs are considering implementing similar units across all operational theaters. Good. Experience shouldn't be discarded just because it comes with wrinkles and gray hair. Phillips gestured toward the busy operations center. You've transformed how this command thinks about operational planning. Even the younger officers who were most resistant initially are now bringing their plans to your team voluntarily before official review. Victoria watched as Rivera mentored a young intelligence analyst, showing him how to identify subtle patterns in surveillance footage that algorithms typically missed. In another corner, Torres was demonstrating a new intelligence verification protocol he had developed based on Victoria's operational experience. We're not replacing technology or youthful energy, Victoria observed. We're complementing them with perspective that only comes from decades in the field. The best operations need both. A wisdom I should have recognized sooner, Phillips admitted. Though I doubt many agent colonels could have taken down an entire enemy squad single-handedly to prove their point. Victoria smiled slightly. I didn't do it to prove a point, sir. I did it because it needed doing, and I was the right person for the job, regardless of age. As Phillips departed, Victoria returned to her team, her gait steady despite the knee that would always bear the evidence of decades of service. The calendar on the wall showed operations scheduled months into the future, operations that would be safer and more effective because of her continued contribution. They had called her too old for combat, until she took down an entire squad. Now they called her Commander of Special Operations. Intelligence assessment, a title far less important than the recognition it represented. In the end, Victoria reflected, the most decisive weapon in any battlefield wasn't youth or strength, but the wisdom to know exactly when and how to deploy the experience that only time could provide. 6 months later, Victoria stood at the graduation ceremony of Fort Reynolds' newest Special Operations class. The young faces before her represented the future. Each soldier trained not only in tactics and technology, but in something new, respect for experience. Combat doesn't care about your age, Victoria addressed them, her voice carrying across the parade ground. It cares about your decisions, your judgment, your ability to see patterns others miss. In the front row sat Harrison, Rivera, and Torres now, instructors in what had informally become known as the Caldwell Doctrine. Behind them, General Phillips watched with unconcealed approval. The enemy we face adapts constantly, Victoria continued. They study our patterns, our technologies, our tendencies. The only advantage they cannot easily counter is the wisdom that comes from decades of encountering their strategies. As the ceremony concluded, a young lieutenant approached Victoria, determination evident in her stance. Colonel, they say I'm too short for extraction operations, she said without preamble. That I can't physically handle the requirements. Victoria studied her for a moment. Lieutenant, size doesn't determine capability any more than age does. Find me tomorrow at 0600. We'll develop a training program that proves them wrong. The lieutenant saluted sharply, her eyes bright with renewed purpose. Victoria watched her go. a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The true victory wasn't just her own continued service. It was creating space for others to overcome the limitations others placed on them. Some battles were fought with weapons. Others were fought with wisdom. Both were equally necessary for victory. If this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button to join our community, where we celebrate the unsung heroes who prove limitations only exist in the minds of those who create them. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know what other stories of remarkable resilience you'd like to hear. Remember to share this video with someone who needs a reminder that experience is never obsolete.